All right, everyone. You can call me Zenith. My primary background is in economics and statistics. Married with kids. Before that, I was a Marine. And what brings me here is that I'm hoping to discuss some things that I see generally being advocated for in the anti-racist movement. Um, One of the things I have an issue with is the notion that we need to codify race into certain laws or have a difference rather than total equality under the law. I think if we undo the progress we've got done to get here, we're just taking things backwards.
What is your perception of the history of codifying race into the law? What's your like kind of timeline and historical knowledge on that?
Uh, I suppose it's fairly basic, things like the Jim Crow laws, you have the runaway slave laws, you have the Three-Fifths Compromise. It's pretty much basic and stuff like that. All the way up to the Civil Rights Act. I guess my viewpoint is from there, it's like I feel like it's kind of hard for us to get any further in that regard. And then we have things like affirmative action, which like it's policies like that. It's like I do not see why we should be judging someone based on the color of their skin rather than their individual merit. Um, and even more recently, the Biden administration is trying to enact certain policies like they had subsidies going to farmers that were intended to go to specific races instead of non-white farmers, or instead of white farmers. So I think policies like that are extremely racist and just generally unacceptable.
I see. Let's take the affirmative action point first, and then we'll talk about the farmers. So, on the affirmative action part, what you said was that you don't think that people should be being judged by their race. Do you think that that's what affirmative action does? Is that it judges you based on your race?
Yeah, I do.
How does that work to you? Like how does affirmative action judge you by your race? Like how is that how it works?
Well, for example, if you look at like college admissions, right? They are doing things where they're making it so that the scores, to qualify are different based on your race. And for example, like they lower the scores required for a black individual to be able to get to college. And I don't see how anyone, especially black people, could look at that and think that that's not extremely racist.
I guess I would want to know what gives you the impression that you think the scores for certain races are being lowered.
Well, I'd have to like I know for one of the places they were doing this was Harvard, right? Um, that they're enacting. Oh, like another thing they're doing is they're bringing back segregation on the college campuses, which I think like
Well,
it's
hang on. Before we get to
we
that, let's stick to the Harvard thing. Let's go down this Harvard
right.
line because I think what you're referencing is some data that was kind of floating around. I think on social media, and you could correct me if I'm wrong about this, but the data was showing a disparity between the SAT scores of black students who are allowed into Harvard versus students from other racial groups. And it was showing that black students entering Harvard were being accepted with substantially lower SAT scores than other students on average. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that sounds about right.
Okay, so I think that you're a stats guy, so I just think that ultimately we have to be careful about how we interpret these statistics in terms of how we reflect this data back onto the real world, and say that this means that black people are being let in with lower scores because they're black, because that's very unlikely. I think for all kinds of reasons. Aside,
Well,
and that data doesn't necessarily reflect that reality. So I think that ultimately, legacy admissions show that a lot of people are let into Harvard with low scores who are white. Um, and no one has a problem with that. Far more students than who are racialized black, and it's just and there's all these scandals, also people cheating and getting people in. It's just very interesting to me that we focus on this one narrow, tiny group uh, of black people. It's a very tiny group that we're talking about, and we put
Well,
them right. Go
I
ahead.
don't even think I would specifically mention black people in particular, because on the other side you have the Asians, which are being held back. So the idea that there's not inherently like a racial component to this when looking at the data, it's like if you just had this one aspect of it, it's like, okay, maybe there's not a causal factor there. But the fact that you see this inverse reaction in relation to the test scores is kind of alarming. And don't get me wrong, I
What's
fully
what's
am
what's
against
what's alarming
legacy
about it?
admissions.
What's alarming about it?
Well, because you're punishing people that like are have put in the work and are getting these scores that should be the first people that you let into one of these institutions.
So
Um,
so isn't it okay? So listen, man, I'm a college professor currently. I think that mindset itself is a problem. The mindset that the people who get the high who have worked to get the highest scores should be the people who get the opportunity to go to these elite institutions. That is fiction. Okay? That's like not how this has ever worked. That is not how college admissions works. It has never worked that way. And so like it's just colleges decide who they want to go, like they decide who they want to be there. They always have. And they have in the past decided that black people couldn't go there. So that is like the actual legacy of racism in these institutions was like keeping black people, keeping Latino people, keeping Native American people out, and then only letting white people get access to that. And then over time, through the movements that you kind of mentioned, that's when things started to change and things started to shift. And the reason why affirmative action policies first came into play is because some of the fixes that they tried to implement, there was extreme pushback on, and people consistently trying to undermine actually having equality under the law. We see the same kind of undermining happening today in all kinds of different contexts and ways. And that is why affirmative action came into being. It always baffles me that people believe that they can understand what lines we need to draw in terms of roll. You talked about rolling us back to a previous time, but the future that we need to create to where there is actual equality is something that has like literally never existed. And so it's just I feel like we should be looking forward, and we should be looking forward, and sometimes looking forward means doing things that I don't know, I think that maybe seem counterintuitive. I don't know about any laws that talk about that benefit specific races or this or that. All I know is that when a law is passed, like in my state of North Carolina, that you can't teach things about races that make people feel like they're responsible for X, Y, and Z, that those laws are not being written for black people. They're being written for specifically for white people. That's why I call them the white people's feelings laws. And now they're all over the country. So they don't have to mention white people in order for me to know that that's who they're targeting with these laws. And in fact, the Jim Crow laws that you mentioned, many of them did not mention races in them. That's not how they were formulated. They were meant to be race neutral, but still have a discriminatory impact, just the same way we see laws happening today. So that's kind of my perspective on it, and feel free to respond or ask anything.
okay, no, I entirely agree with you. Well, almost entirely, except for the very last bit, but I guess we'll get to that. Um, right, like yeah, it's fully the institutions probably have never fully in practice or fully in practice actually pursued the ideals that science dictates they should be pursuing. And I do actually think we have solutions available to us to
I,
deal with these problems.
sorry, I just want to say
And
one
one of
thing
them
about
is,
what science dictates, right? Because science once dictated that we should separate humans into races and that some races were above others, right? So, like, we should
yeah,
be clear about science. You know, science is not the end all be all because once it did promote racism explicitly.
well, right, but I get okay. The spirit of science dictates. Like if we're in pursuit of truth, right? Like, and say I'm like at an institution of higher learning, a person's like the color of their skin should not matter. It's like either they are more in line with the truth and more capable, and thus should be let into this institution, or they're not. But I guess that's my point. Like race should not even play a role in that determinant. Something is either true or scientifically sound, regardless of what a person looks like.
No, I mean, I 100% agree with that, bro. And I agree that things should be that way. As it turns out, things are definitely not that way. And so, like, you know, that's the life that I live every day is a world in which that is not true. That's like literally my life experiences is a series of moments where that is proven to be not true.
Let me this is one of my key issues with reparations. Like say we're passed at the federal level or something like that. The amount of money that would take is not money our government actually has. So what they would do is they would borrow that money. And the issue I have with that is then you're not even taking money from people who are alive right now. You are ultimately borrowing money from future generations that you're ultimately, ironically, selling into a form of debt slavery, right? And so it's like you kind of have to like do a cost benefit analysis there, and it's like, are there ways where we can help these people that aren't screwing over people that are totally innocent and aren't even born yet? So
I mean, I think that that's the wrong calculus you're doing there, brother. You know, or maybe the right calculus, but the wrong values. Like the cost benefit analysis. Um, I don't know. I think in this country in America, it's very difficult for most people to have a realistic understanding of the negative impacts on our society that the racial hierarchy has because a lot of people never have to think about it. As I was saying to you earlier, my literal life experience is like continuously being forced to recognize that what you were kind of saying is not true. And what, even though a lot of people believe it, that we live in some kind of meritocracy, that we live in some kind of society where just because you do the best or because you are the best, that'll be recognized and you'll be rewarded for that at some point.
well, it doesn't really matter to me what other people are like. I guess in my perspective, I'm not going to be racist just because someone else is racist. Like I'm still going to choose to treat people based on the quality of their character and their individual merit rather than presuming some history that they might have that I don't know about. Like, if you understand what I'm saying, because I don't know any more about them off the get go than they know about me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think anything in society is suggesting that you should. I mean,
Well, I mean,
you should just be aware that there's this overwhelming majority of black people who experience racism regularly. That is our reality for a lot of us. Like it doesn't, you don't have to change the way that you act, but like that is true. That is real. That is like a lot of our experience. And so
do
you
you
do whatever
do
you
you
want in response to
think
that.
right? Right, but do you not think it's weird that like you don't extend that to other people as well? Like, because it sounds like you have the perspective that I inherently am somehow like I'm not impacted by racism or I don't experience racism or
I
anything
was
like
I was
that.
I wasn't implying that whatsoever. I never said
Well,
anything
I mean,
like that.
oh no, it just yeah, that's why I was clarifying because it sounded like you were saying like I would not know what those things are like. You know what I mean?
Well, you probably don't know what it's like for a black person. I don't know how you could, since there's like a generations long history of us being oppressed, based on our race in the country. So like, that's like a part of my ancestry. Like, I don't know if you can comprehend the dimensions of what that means for my life. You know,
Well,
I
right, but
think that would be a
by
little
that
bit
same
difficult for you.
token, you don't know how that necessarily impacts me as being held in this position where, say my race are like the bad guys in history, and then, or that like you were evil enslavers, like I've been called slurs. Um, so it's just right. So I'm not going to speak on your experience. And then I guess in my perspective is like I kind of also don't want anyone else speaking to my experience.
Okay.
So,
Why don't you speak
but
on
yeah,
your? I mean,
it is
you
what
could
it
speak
is.
you could speak on your experience. That's why you're here. Like, you speak on it. Like,
Well, I guess
I'll
I
ask
guess
you a
my thing
question.
is I wouldn't want to, which is why which is kind of one of the things that I'm kind of confused about some aspects of the movement. It's like in my perspective, it's like I actually don't care what you think of me or how you view my race. I'm going to do what I need to do to be successful and survive regardless. And if you try to stop me, well, you're going to lose. And I think that's a viewpoint that we just need to like really instill in society again in general. Um, because like a lot of time it's just like I don't know. It's just, I feel everyone, because it sounds like a lot of the stuff you're talking about goes back to like more like class warfare type stuff. And I think we need to stop waiting on people to save us and save ourselves.
To me, it was just an expression of American culture. Um, you know, as you said, he was like, go back to the idea that you do what you need to survive, and anyone who gets in your way, you just roll over them, right? So, dog eat dog kind of mentality. That's always been a part of American culture, and I think that Zenith is just expressing that is something that we should be promoting. Um, I think it's pretty entrenched in our society already.
Um,
A hyper
if I
individualism.
if I may, it's not really a dog eat dog. Because the idea is I actually want people to work together for a better future. Um, but more about the if you're dealing with someone who isn't like say they hate you for the color of your skin, why are you going to give them the time of day? Their opinion is entirely irrelevant. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't agree. I don't think their opinion is irrelevant just because they hate you for the color of your skin, because their opinion and that hate can actually have real consequences in your reality, whether you think it matters or not. That's how racism works. That's how it operates in our
Well,
reality. It
but how are you
intrudes
going to
whether you.
stop someone from being racist?
All I'm saying is, first you need to understand how it operates. It operates on you whether you think about it or not, whether you care about it or not, whether you think about your own identity as something or not. It really doesn't matter. When something happens, it happens to you, without any of your thoughts being relevant whatsoever. And so,
But right, like the idea is that in that instance you're talking about, they're effectively trying to control me, right? So my only options are to defend myself or simply just not be controlled. It's really a difference between what we can do versus what we can't do. I can't control other people's thoughts, hate, or opinion. I can try to educate them and get them to not be, well, evil, but I above and beyond that, what I can do is all that really matters. So if I have a group of people that hate me for whatever reason, whether it's my how tall I am, the way I look, anything like that, I can't force them to associate with me, and I also can't understand why I'd want to associate with them. So I'm going to go my own way and be successful with other like-minded people if that's what I need to do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, historically, that hasn't been allowed for black people to do in this country. You could look at Black Wall Street for an example. There's many other examples. Right now, there's like a hundreds of millions of dollars lawsuit from a couple of black executives at a company who made the company through a formula that they came up with, um, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they didn't get paid. They got released, and then other people took credit for their work, and then they had to go to court in order to sue, and they're still in lawsuit years later. So
Yeah.
like, it's stuff like that. Like, unfortunately, and I tell stories about this on the show all the time. Like, our excellence, when we excel, it's not often looked upon favorably by the populace, and not only not looked upon, but people try to sabotage, and that's because of a legacy and a history of anti-black, specifically anti-black hatred. There's a long historical legacy of it in the country, as I'm sure you're aware. So um, that's that's what we're dealing with, right? Like, we can't just move to a different state and like escape something like that. There's really nowhere to go to escape something like that in some way. The consequences are infinite to what has been done against black people, and so um, that's our life. That's the life that we have to live. That's not a life that you've lived, brother. And so, like, I just think that you should be careful thinking what people should do in a situation that you've never been in. You know what I mean? Personally, um, as somebody who, has existed in this world for almost 40 years now, in a country that's, you know, under a generations long racial hierarchy where people who look like me are placed on the bottom, and
Mhm.
having grown up a very gifted child who was doing algebra by the time they were in kindergarten, plays violin, trumpet, and piano, learning guitar, um, who, I have a bachelor's in English, I have a master's degree in mathematics education, I have a law degree that I got because my students who I was teaching in a Harlem high school were being arrested for no reason. And it was
I mean,
happening continuously.
I've been arrested for no reason too, but
I'm sure you
that's
have,
a
brother.
whole other story.
That it's not a competition, brother. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
But that
Hang on,
that
wait, wait, wait,
you
wait,
saying
wait.
all that
Hang on.
does.
Well, let me ask you, why did you feel the need to jump in to say that?
Oh no, just because I'm afraid, or I actually wanted to say something else. I thought it was interesting that when you were saying that, it's like, so despite everything, you've obviously been successful. You know, you've got a good job. You teach at a university. You've got multiple degrees. So it's just strange to me. It's like, do you really feel like you've been held back in that regard? Because as far as I can tell, you've been perfectly successful.
Well, brother, you, um, yes, obviously, I do believe I was held back. I talk about it consistently on the show, all the different ways in which I was held back. I could be a lot further on than along than I am. So yeah, people held me back in all kinds of various ways. I could start listing them, and I would not end in the time that we have left. So I don't know what you were expecting to, how you were expecting to perceive that without me telling you, but like that's weird, right? Like, how would you be
Well,
able to
it's
perceive?
just
How would you be able to perceive it just because I have 3 degrees? You go ahead. You were saying?
so in my perspective, like one of the major problems in my professional life is there are tons of resources out there that I could be using for my business that I can't pursue because I'm not a minority or I'm not a woman. And it's like, so can I also not sit here and say that I am also being held back because of my race?
I don't think that resources being offered to a group that you do not belong to means that you are being held back. I think that that is not a proper way of describing what's happening.
But it is because in a competitive market, right, I cannot truly compete with someone who's being subsidized, right? They have a lower
I
cost of
mean,
operation than I
you 100% absolutely can compete with people who are being subsidized. No one's being subsidized enough to push you out of the market, sir, especially not minority groups. So I don't think that you have to worry about that.
but that's exactly what I opened up this conversation with telling you that like I don't I right if regardless if these things exist or not, rather than focusing that they're not available to me, or if I perceive I'm being held back in some way, all I can do is succeed in spite of that, right?
I mean, it's not in spite of it because it has nothing to do with you. You like tangentially, it has something to do with you because you're in the same market. But you're thinking this is giving someone such a huge edge over you that it's actually some kind of a detriment, and that is just not realistic. You've built that up in your mind, but that's not real.
Well, I mean, I like here's the thing, it is such a major aspect of what's going on now. In order to make certain projects we have financially feasible, we have to hire certain people, or meet certain quotas, right? And these are not
What are you
necessarily
talk?
things
Wait,
we would normally do, but this is
what are you talking
even just
about?
to be able to compete in the market.
What are you saying? Can you? What are you?
For example,
Yeah, please.
for example, like if we're investing in certain properties or something like that, right, that are available only to certain people meet certain criteria. In this particular case, it is race or ethnic background. And because of this, because these credits are available, it inflates the price of these certain assets. Meaning the only way you can even attempt to be active in that market is if you bring on people of these certain races or ethnic backgrounds. Um, so it does impact us. Like there are certain ways that I can't. Okay, I mean this goes right down like the topic of ESG scores. Like you can get preferential loans if you meet certain criteria. And that means in order to even be able to compete in the market, I need to start hiring people based on their race. And I disagree with that. I want to hire whoever deserves it the most, whoever's the hungriest, whoever's the most competent, because that not only helps me, but that also helps the consumer.
I think that in your explanation, you're kind of perverting the reason for those loans and the reason for those programs. Like, you're twisting the reason. Like, there's a reason why those things were created, and you're deleting it in your explanation.
Well, they provide the reasons for why they're doing it, right? They're trying to spur economic growth amongst minorities, right?
And what's the reason for that, sir?
Uh, Probably because they're racist.
Your answer to the reason why they're trying to spur economic growth for minority communities is because they are racist.
Yes, because the only explanation for that is that they view these groups as being incapable of competing. Like they are. It's sure it's not a malevolent racism. It's benevolent racism, but it is still a form of racism.
All right, let me just sit with that for a second. Hmm.
I was wondering, do you think any and all like discrepancies in outcomes among races can only be due to and attributed to racism?
No.
All right. Well, there goes that. So, well, but if that had that impact on you as a kid, it's like how do you think that impacts my kids in the present? Them being told that they're like, say, evil colonizers, or that they'll never deserve anything they earn because society bends over backwards for them and is set up to benefit them and them own. It's like, is that not also going to have a similar effect? Like that's ultimately what I'm trying to step away from. I kind of want to move past this, like in general as a society. And I know we kind of talked about this earlier, and you responded by basically saying it's like, yeah, but other people are going to go on carrying. And it's like, once again, I can't control what an idiot thinks, right? If they're going to go on being an idiot, I can't stop them from being an idiot. All I can do is not be an idiot. You get what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, brother, but that's not all you can do. That's just not true. And so, like, that's what you've told yourself. That's all I can do. But I think really the truth is that that's all you're willing to do. And that's fine. But that's not true that that's all you can do?
Well, what would you have me do?
Well, it's not what I would have you do, brother. I have you do whatever you want. But you've made a choice. Just own your choice. That's all I'm saying.
Well, well, right. But that's like saying I don't act to like improve society around me. You know what I mean? It's like I still do things, but how am I going to help someone who doesn't want to be helped? Like if someone is just that determined on being hateful and racist or whatever, it gets to a certain point where you have to like cut your losses and be like, I'm literally just wasting my time with this guy. My time and energy could be better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree on an individual basis, but this problem isn't an individual problem. It started
Okay,
collectively, it was perpetuated collectively, and it'll be solved collectively. You can either be part of that collective of people who are trying to solve it, or you could be part of the collective of people who are trying to perpetuate it. It's unfortunate, but that's reality.
but aren't you perpetuating it by trying to enact policies rather than remove those kinds of policies?
I could see why you would believe that, Zenith. I could see why you would have that perspective. But the truth is, changing, uh, unraveling racism is an extremely complicated and generations long process.
But
Okay, if
that's
you're
like
not,
saying you can teach
hang,
people not to be evil.
I mean, do you want to hear what I have to say or not, brother?
No, go on. Go on.
Okay, I'm telling you. All right, this is a generations long problem. It's not going to be solved in your kid's lifetime. Okay, this is going to continue throughout the entire lifetime of your kids. Okay, so like that's why I said you should just own your choice, because your choice is that I want to be removed from this fight. The people who choose to be removed from the fight when they're actually in the fight, which you and your kids both are, whether you want to be or not, like that choice is a choice of perpetuating racism. That is the unfortunate reality. That is the choice that you're making. Okay, now if you choose to fight against racism and to be anti-racist, and you think that teaching your children not to recognize that there are inequalities, historical generations long inequalities of race and a racial hierarchy that does in fact benefit them in all kinds of ways that are invisible to them, probably. Like, I think that ultimately that also perpetuates racism.
But
Um,
would you not teach that to your kids as well? That there may be benefits that they're not even aware of that exist?
100%. But I think that ultimately for black kids, we recognize the benefits that we get based on our race because there's so many burdens. The burdens vastly outweigh the benefits. And so when we do get a benefit, it's very clear. So a lot of black people don't need to be taught that because it's like through our experience, we just like end up perceiving it. But a lot of white people don't grow up being taught anything about what it means to be white. It's like something that, like, you're not teaching your children about it. Like, a lot of people don't teach their children about it. They don't talk about it. There's nowhere they talk about it. And so, therefore, they don't end up recognizing the benefits that they're getting as a racialized white person in the society. And then they feel some kind of way when people point them out because they've never thought about it. And so, like, it's I part of the reason I do this show is because it's a chance for people to think about it, sometimes for the first time. Um, and I think that's very important because that is the reality of the life many of these people are living, and they don't even know it. And that is something that perpetuates racism, is that ignorance.
Well, I do think you're right that, and this is actually backed by statistics. Like white people are not very focused on viewing themselves as white people, right? Like they're very low in the racial identity rankings. And my concern would be is by teaching white children to be more focused on their race, is it could have actually the opposite impact, right? And where
I
they start actually focusing on themselves, they get a stronger racial identity, and then they start advocating for policies that helps their race. And that's kind of why, like, it's, I know you said like this is a problem that can be solved maybe even in the future, but I don't think it is. I mean, evil is a human problem. It's not going to be solved until the end times. Um, so, and that's kind of why I'm saying, like, rather than focusing on it, which is just going to grow it, we need to be the better people and just be like, you know what? Like, if this is not a battle that gets won by continuing fighting it, it's one that gets won when we say, okay, enough. Enough is enough. We need to stop and just view each other as humans.
All right, but Zenith, man, I mean, don't you think it's a little presumptuous of you to to say like how the battle will end, like whether it can or can't be done? Like, come on, man. That's
But are you saying there's a cure for evil? That's what I don't get.
listen. I'm not saying there's a cure for evil. I'm saying that racism was made by us and it can be unmade by us. Okay, it's not like it's an impossible task. I don't think that's realistic. I do
But it
understand.
still arose out of us. You know what I mean?
Of course, literally everything that we created did. Yes. So like, um, I know. Yeah.
Right. So, but that's
What?
so I just don't even okay, like say you do somehow end it because that tendency for evil is within us. Say it actually we actually somehow find a way to like an entire generation where no one is racist. I don't think it's gonna last. It's just going to come back.
Okay, but do you
Like
notice
it's
how
it's
every
deep
time,
rooted
like
within
every time,
our
think
humanity.
one thing I'm noticing, bro, is like every time you imagine a future where we don't have racism, like there's some fear that follows it. Like, oh, if we do this, then like it won't last. If we do this, then like is it really gonna? Like there's always like it seems like you have a hard time imagining a world in which this doesn't exist, and like I think that's like the found like if that's the case, like every thought that you have after that, you're never gonna actually follow a line of thought,
Well,
that leads to
because I
that.
mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I kind of don't think it's possible. It's like,
I mean, you
could
already
I
said,
spend
yeah,
time?
you already said that. So like the point is, if
Well,
you don't think it's possible, then we're just talking about something imaginary to you. I do think it's
but well,
possible. So
well, right, because let me phrase it this way. In order for me to imagine that kind of society, I have to also be willing to comprehend a society where jealousy doesn't exist, right? Envy doesn't exist. Like no one covets anything, no one wants anything, no one's willing to lie. Like I do in fact have a very hard time.
I mean, to me, that's not the world that I imagine. Like I mean,
Um,
like you say, we're still human beings. We have all aspects as part of them, but like I don't think that we can be so callous as uh, to not recognize that we've created a society that incentivizes bad behavior. We've created a society that incentivizes othering people, that incentivizes exploiting people, um, that incentivizes violence. Um, I just, that's a society that we made, and it was a mistake. So,
well, right, but if you label a group of people, say like like oppressive colonizers or something, is that not in itself
I
like
mean,
an othering?
you keep bringing that up, brother, but like I never have advocated for that or have mentioned that. I don't know why you keep saying it.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, that's not what I advocate for. I don't
Well, I
think
mean,
it's something that should be
I
happening.
will say though that like you did make the point where we got to be like teaching our kids like, hey, did you know that like there's like your race in particular is responsible for this unjust hierarchy that exists, and like it's up to like
I mean,
that
it's not
still
just that. It's just not racialized white people who have been responsible for upholding white supremacy. And I talk about that all the time on the show. Many races have got, including black people, have gotten into the fray and have supported white supremacy, and they still do presently to this day. So, no, I would not teach that. I would teach
but
reality.
do you think other races don't do that as well?
I'm sorry?
Do you not think other races do that as well? Like
Do what as
you have
well?
organizations like La Raza and there are black supremacists, there are Asian supremacists. I don't see why singling out white supremacy has any real utility.
The reason why singling out white supremacy, the reason why we single it out is because the historical legacy of white supremacy predates any of these other things that you're mentioning it, because they literally created the racial hierarchy themselves. So, like, they literally created blackness. Blackness wouldn't exist without white people. They created it. And so, like, that's why you're creating a false equivalence by comparing them because, like, one came out of the other.
Then you say it's like, well, I want to hear about your experiences too, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. Is it just going turning into a back and forth of like, well, I've experienced this. Oh yeah, well, I've
But
experienced this.
that,
Oh yeah, well,
what I'm
I'm
trying to
more
what I'm trying to explain
pragmatic.
to you,
Like,
brother,
I'm very solutions based.
that's fine. But like
I'm sorry,
you,
you say that again?
I said that's great. I want to be solutions based, and we'll focus on solutions for the last 20 minutes here or so. But like, I do want to say that, um, you know, sharing our experiences of being racialized specifically, not of slights. This wasn't about slights. This was about existing in a racialized society as a black person. That's what it was about. And so, like, that's the story that I told. It wasn't about slights that everyone endures. It was about something that happened to me specifically as a black person. I was giving you some insight into the experience that I had with my friend and how her perception of what was happening to me never changed despite me telling her over and over and over about what was occurring. But the thing that did change her perception was in a moment where she perceived it herself. And so, really, her perceiving it herself was the only thing that made the difference. Nothing that I said to her would make a difference, even though that we were friends. And I actually confronted her on that later, and she did acknowledge that she never listened to me, and she apologized for it. And because she married a black man and started, as often happens with racialized white people when their life starts becoming closer and closer to a racialized black person, they start seeing a lot more racism. They start feeling a lot more racism. She has two biracial kids now, so that's only going to continue. And so that's why she apologized, but she still struggles with it every day of like, she was programmed to like kind of to find alternative reasonings and to immediately think for something outside of the scope of race and racism. And that is something that perpetuates the system, that kind of thinking. That's something that I try to fight against. And that's part of what I do here.
If we can view the interactions between the different races and understand that, say, everyone's working to the benefit of their own interest, it's like, so what do we do? What is the actual solution? Because remember, I think this is a problem that can't be solved. We can just control ourselves. You know what I mean?
I think that we need to make anti racism part of our national identity in America. I think that that would go a long way in slowing down racism to a halt. Because if we were teaching our children that being against discriminating by race, and that the reason we're against discriminating by race is because we have a long history of doing so, and we know for sure that it doesn't work out, and that we're building a better world where we don't do that. If that is, but we're not there yet, and we need active participation throughout our lives, which is the case, then I think that would go a long way in dealing with the problem of racism. But our government has made it very clear that that is not the direction in which it's going to go by passing laws to prohibit, state laws right now, but, state laws across the country that are prohibiting the teaching of race for all intents and purposes. So, yeah, that's where we're at right now. So, what I'm doing is I'm creating my own separate space where I can communicate with people about this subject matter, where I can educate people about this subject matter. I'm creating live events where I can do that in my local community and in other communities where people don't have an opportunity and a space to have these conversations and to learn about this subject matter in a way that's accessible and easy and where they feel comfortable and where they feel like they're not going to be attacked. So that's like the that's what I'm individually doing. when I can do more, I'm also a college professor. I teach black students all the time. I mentor a lot of different students. I mentor a lot of white students too. But like, I'm just out there doing what I can as an individual, to make sure that people understand that I understand that there is a racial hierarchy. I understand that it does work on them. I understand how it works on them. So a lot of these black students that I mentor, the reason why I'm an effective mentor to them is because I actually understand the life that they're living. So I can give them advice that's reflective of that life and that experience that they're having. Um, I can be there for them during experiences where they may experience racism and prejudice and kind of head it off at the pass because of ways I've learned to do that. Um, and yeah, like that's kind of what I'm doing as an individual. I do want to do more in the future when I get more resources and power, and I will.
Well, I definitely think that's good, right? Like I definitely agree that we definitely have to have people focusing on their subconscious biases and things like that. I think that's all very good. Um, I do think we need to be very careful with how we do it, though, because if you too hard, if the pendulum goes too far, which I think we're actually seeing in society right now, I think it's actually hurting race relations, right? Because you have like a portion of the population who feels like they're being attacked and demonized as evil oppressors, and then right if the other half of the population is viewing the other half as actually being evil oppressors, I just don't see what's going to bring them together, right? I don't
Well,
see
I don't think
how.
that that's happening at all, sir. So I don't think that we need to be concerned about it. I think that's totally
Well,
imaginary.
haven't polls and whatnot been like suggesting that like people are viewing race relations as getting worse over time, especially over the past, I don't say, decade or so?
I mean, definitely, but I mean, that's people's subjective opinion on race relations, and I don't think that that's trustworthy an objective measurement of whether that's true or not. And I think that that's a reasonable way to look at it given the level of propaganda that exists in America and that is just overwhelming. And so I think that um, I think that also there was this long period, right, of color blindness, right, and of oh, we're already past that. When I grew up, the common phrase was, "We live in a post-racial society." People were saying that, and that was obviously false, but like that was like a very common refrain, and I never believed that. People would say it, and I would just shut up because like people were not listening to me. Like I said with my friend, when I knew that that wasn't the case because I was living my life as a black person and I was being shown that that wasn't the case all the time. And so, but nobody wanted to hear it, And now that we're actually talking about it, we got people like you saying, "Why are we talking about it so much?" And it's just frustrating because like I don't know why, Zenith, you feel like you can be a reliable arbiter of whether the pendulum has swung too far or not. It really doesn't make any sense to me why so many, especially racialized white people, feel like they're a good barometer for whether we've gone too far or not. To me, that is one of the most confusing aspects of our time right now. So if you have any insight on what makes you feel like you can do that, I would love to hear it.
I mean, well, that's kind of the thing. It's like you pointed out these are just subjective opinions, but that's the only way in which you can measure race relations. Like how else would you, like, if polls of suitable sample sizes are suggesting that people are perceiving the relations to be getting worse, what other metric or methodology would you use to measure such a thing?
I mean, I think that there's all kinds of data to collect, but ultimately, collection of racial data is difficult for all kinds of reasons, brother. Because race was made up. These categories are imaginary, and so like people get put in them, they get taken out of them, they get put in them again. Like some forms have racial categories, so other forms don't have. They're used for different reasons, and those reasons are very context specific. So sometimes you'll see police arrest records where people are called white even though they were literally black, or black even though they were literally white. Like all of the like, there's all a lot of problems in the collection of racial data. And so I don't think there is reliable data that exists out there in order to make wide, sweeping conclusions about race. That's my conclusion as someone who's done a lot of research into that. And I think that most racial studies do indicate that their conclusions are preliminary and extremely limited by methodology, limitations of methodology, and reliability. So
But isn't that kind of like a thing though? It's like if in order to say we're like in a white centric society with white people at the top of the totem pole, it's like is that still not just making a generalization? Um,
not,
you know, like just
not
about all white people?
no. I mean, you can literally look at the top of like CEOs. You could look at people who own things. It's like almost exclusively white people. So I don't think so. No. I
Well,
mean, we have the
here it's
facts.
specifically white people. There's just like in Asia, it's specifically Asian people,
Yeah,
and
but
in
we said
Africa, it's specifically African
we were
people.
gonna focus on it here, right? So that's what we're
Well,
doing.
yes, but it comes into play because I would actually point this in not being a racial thing, but a class thing. This is wealth, like some of this wealth has existed for generations, right? And keeping everyone of all races down who are below them. This is more of a class thing than a race thing, in my perspective.
In America,
Yes.
I don't know why. I just I don't get that. Like, I mean, I know classism exists and has always existed in America, but like, again, it seems like you're just deleting the racial history of the country. You rarely ever, if ever, take it into account in your thinking. And so like, but it's extremely impactful on everybody. So like, it's just like, how are you coming to conclusions without using any kind of racial analysis? Like, why do you think that that's allowable or acceptable or will lead you to a reasonable conclusion?
Have you ever lived in anywhere other than the United States?
But can you just answer my question maybe instead of asking me
Well,
one?
no. Okay, well, you that this is I. In order for me to answer the question, I need to know: have you ever lived in another country?
I don't think you need to know that in order to answer the question. So,
Okay, because I have lived in another country, right? A non-white country. So that is why I feel I do actually kind of have a good gauge of these things about the idea that regardless, if not by um, if not by race, society will always stratify or that will always stratify along other lines. If it's not going to be race, it's always going to be something.
and
Well, and like, but that's my point. Is like, so when I point out things like exactly what we like talked about earlier, with like the legacy admissions and all that, benefiting white people who should not be in college. It's like I obviously have a problem with that, but other people can point at that and be like, "Oh, well, this is existing to help white people." But hey, I'm a white person, and it doesn't exist to help me. It exists to help the people who are in power, who have been in power. This high society that now thinks they live by rules that don't apply to the rest of us, which is kind of why this they want us focusing on each other's races and fighting amongst each other instead of looking at them and being like, yeah, you know what? You're just having us fight each other so you can run off with all the fine china.
I mean, I don't really care what anyone wants me to think about. I just think about what I think about, which is I am anti racist. I'm against racism. Racism is still virulent in the society, and I'm actually actively fighting against it. I think, like, for us, like, that's my stance. That's what I'm doing. Like, you're not doing that. Like, and that's fine. That's your choice to not do it. But, like, I don't, like, in terms of like your perspective on the subject matter, I mean, I appreciate you sharing it, but I would just encourage you to. I don't think that you can really get that far without opening yourself up further to like learning about um, white supremacy. It doesn't sound like you've actually like intentionally tried to learn about it. You've learned about it accidentally through school, basically. Like, and that's not really enough. Like there's so much to learn about how a racial hierarchy has acted on us. Like, I mean, it goes deep,
Well,
brother. It goes real deep.
to correct you, I am doing something specifically. Like I'm actually very active in a certain sector that I believe does stem from racism, and that's abortion. Right? You have Margaret Sanger. She was an avid racist. There's a reason why Planned Parenthood facilities are located, in inner city black neighborhoods. And they kill. They're killing millions of black babies. And so, like, for me, and I call that out because I do call out the racial aspect of that and the origins of Planned Parenthood. So you can't say I'm totally inactive in fighting racism.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that you're totally inactive. I was just going by your own words. Because earlier in the conversation, you made it pretty
Right.
clear that you're not going to be talking about race. You're not going to be acknowledging race. You're not going to teach your children about race. So it didn't seem like you would be talking about.
Well, I mean that's my ideal, right? My ideal would be to not have to. Um, but right, like
So then, can
because
I
like,
ask you, like,
and
why
that's the
in the
thing. It's
context of a
because of the focus on race that I have to teach my kids about race.
can I ask you, like, why in the context of abortion you want to talk about it, but like in other contexts you don't want to talk about it? Like, why did you decide in that context? Now I'm gonna support black people.
Oh no, that's my point. Black people is the reason I do it. I just understand the history and how it disproportionately impacts black people. The reason I do it is because all human lives are important and have value. That is why I do it. It's
So
not
it's
like I'm going to
so it's not about
go and
so it's not
fight
a,
against
so
the
sorry. So it's not about anti-racism.
no, no. That's my point. Is like I'm going to do whatever I need to help people. Period. And for me to focus on race in my pursuit of helping people just makes me feel kind of dirty and icky. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I hear that, brother. It may make you feel that way, but that doesn't mean it's not a worthy cause, and that doesn't mean that it's not something that needs to be done. Maybe you should wrestle with those feelings of ickiness and dirtiness because maybe that's where the problem actually lies, right? Maybe you can unravel those feelings and like discover why you feel that way because I feel perfectly fine about it, and I don't feel icky, I don't feel dirty, and we're both human beings, brother. So just think on that.
Well, okay. Well, hey, I've enjoyed talking, but I think now might be a good time to kind of do our wrap up.
Yeah, let's wrap it up, brother. I appreciate you joining me for this discussion. Really appreciate it. Why don't you tell everybody if you have anything you want to promote or if you want anyone to follow you or anything like that?
Well, I don't even remember the name of my handle on my account. But yeah, uh, I'm Zenith. I'll be around. Hey, if you want to have me back on again sometime, I'm down. Maybe we can pick a specific topic to hammer out or something like that, like a specific aspect, and maybe I can do a little bit of study. Yeah, we can. As I said, I'm very pragmatic and solutions based. So maybe we can discuss solutions next time.
Great, great. Yeah. Love to, brother. So thank you so much for your time tonight and appreciate it. You're definitely welcome back anytime. As I said, just got to come with an open heart and open mind. I think you displayed that today, and I really appreciate you engaging in the dialogue with me. All right.
All right, and I appreciate you too. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good night. Be well.
You too.